NT, living room, night. The only light in the room comes from the flickering television, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Rachel, 30s, in her pajamas, is curled up on the sofa, half asleep. The late-night movie is interrupted by a sudden, jarring knock at the front door. Rachel's eyes snap open. She sits up, her heart beginning to pound a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Who would be knocking at this hour? It's almost midnight. She glances at the grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum swinging like a silent, ominous metronome. Another knock, louder this time, more insistent. It echoes through the quiet house, each rap a physical jolt to her senses. She slowly gets to her feet, her bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. A knot of unease tightens in her stomach. Every horror movie she's ever seen is suddenly playing on a loop in her mind. She creeps towards the door, her breath held tight in her chest. The peephole is a small, dark circle of dread. She hesitates for a moment, her hand trembling slightly as she reaches for the doorknob. Then, with a deep, steadying breath, she peers through. A man stands on her porch. He's tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in a dated, ill-fitting suit. His face is obscured by the deep shadows cast by the porch light, but what she can see of it is pale, almost unnaturally so. He's holding a battered, old-fashioned suitcase, but it's his smile that sends a chill down her spine. It's too wide, too fixed, a grotesque caricature of a friendly grin. It doesn't reach his eyes, which remain hidden in the darkness. He knocks again, a sharp, impatient rap that makes her jump back from the door. Her heart is now a frantic drum against her ribs. She should scream, call the police, do something. But she's frozen, held captive by a strange, morbid curiosity. Who is this man, and what could he possibly be selling at this hour? With a trembling hand, she unlocks the door. It's a decision she'll come to regret for the rest of her life. The door creaks open, and the man's smile widens, if that's even possible. The single porch light above him flickers, casting his face in a strobe of light and shadow. And for a fleeting, terrifying moment, she thinks she sees something wrong with his eyes, something not quite human. "Good evening," he says, his voice a low, smooth baritone that seems to slither into the room. It's a voice that's both charming and deeply unsettling. "Sorry to call on you so late. I was just in the neighborhood and saw your light on. My name is Mr. Abernathy, and I have something truly special to show you, something that will change your life." He hefts the battered suitcase, a strange glint in his shadowed eyes. "May I come in?" Rachel knows she should say no. Every instinct is screaming at her to slam the door in his face and call the police. But there's something about him, a strange, hypnotic quality to his voice, his smile, his very presence, that holds her in place. It's like being a mouse caught in the gaze of a snake. Against her better judgment, she finds herself nodding, stepping back to let him in. The moment he crosses the threshold, the air in the room seems to grow cold, the shadows deepening in the corners. The grandfather clock chimes midnight, each toll a deep, resonant knell that seems to mark the beginning of a nightmare. Mr. Abernathy sets his suitcase down on the coffee table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound seems to echo in the sudden, heavy silence of the room. He straightens up, his unnaturally tall frame seeming to fill the space, to suck the very air from it. He unlatches the suitcase. The sound of the metal clasps clicking open is unnervingly loud in the quiet room. He opens the lid slowly, tantalizingly, as if revealing a great and terrible secret. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded red velvet, is a collection of strange and unsettling objects. A tarnished silver locket that seems to pulse with a faint inner light. A small, intricately carved wooden box that exudes a faint, sweet, and cloying odor. A set of antique porcelain dolls with eyes that seem to follow your every move. And in the center of it all, a single, black, leather-bound book with no title. "I sell memories," Mr. Abernathy says, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Good memories, bad memories, memories that have been forgotten, memories that have yet to be made. Anything your heart desires, for a price, of course." Rachel stares at the objects, a strange mix of fascination and revulsion welling up inside her. She knows she should be terrified. She knows she should run, but she can't look away. It's as if the objects in the suitcase have a life of their own, a dark and seductive energy that draws her in. What are you talking about?" she stammers, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Abernathy's smile widens. He reaches into the suitcase and picks up the tarnished silver locket. "This," he says, holding it up so that it catches the light from the television, "contains the memory of a first love. A love so pure, so innocent, it will make your heart ache with a sweet, forgotten nostalgia." He dangles it in front of her, the locket swinging back and forth like a hypnotist's watch. "Imagine," he says, his voice a mesmerizing purr, reliving that moment. The first touch, the first kiss, the butterflies in your stomach. You can have it for a small price. Rachel finds herself reaching for it, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth metal. The moment she touches it, a jolt of something, a memory that is not her own, flashes through her mind. A sun-drenched afternoon in a field of wildflowers, a young man with kind eyes and a shy smile, a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy. She gasps and pulls her hand back as if burned. The memory fades, leaving behind a hollow ache of longing. What did you do to me?" she asks, her voice trembling. "I gave you a taste," Mr. Abernathy says, his smile more predatory than ever. "A free sample, if you will, to whet your appetite." He places the locket back in the suitcase and picks up the small wooden box. "Or perhaps you're looking for something a little darker," he says, his voice dropping to a low, suggestive whisper. "This box contains the memory of a perfect revenge. The sweet, satisfying taste of vengeance against someone who has wronged you." He opens the box, and the cloying, sweet smell intensifies. It's the smell of decay, of something rotten and corrupt. Rachel feels a wave of nausea wash over her. "I don't want any of this," she says, her voice regaining some of its strength. "I want you to leave now." Mr. Abernathy's smile falters for a moment, a flicker of something cold and dangerous in his eyes. But then it's back, wider and more unsettling than ever. "Oh, but you do," he says. "You just don't know it yet. Everyone wants something, a second chance, a lost love, a forgotten dream. And I can give it to you for a price." He closes the suitcase with a sharp, definitive snap. The sound seems to break the spell that had held Rachel in its thrall. The fear, which had been a low, humming undercurrent, now floods her in a cold, suffocating wave. "Get out of my house," she says, her voice shaking but firm. Mr. Abernathy's smile finally fades, replaced by a look of cold, calculating appraisal. He picks up his suitcase and walks towards the door. For a moment, she thinks he's going to leave, and a wave of relief washes over her. But then he stops, his hand on the doorknob, and turns to look at her. The porch light is behind him, casting his face in deep shadow, but she can feel the weight of his gaze, cold and heavy. "You'll change your mind," he says, his voice a low, chilling promise. "They always do. And when you do, I'll be waiting." He opens the door and steps out into the night. The door clicks shut behind him, plunging the room back into a heavy, oppressive silence. Rachel stands there for a long moment, her body trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She rushes to the door and locks it, her fingers fumbling with the deadbolt. She leans her forehead against the cool wood of the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It was just a dream, she tells herself, a vivid, terrifying nightmare. That's all it was. But then she sees it. On the coffee table, where Mr. Abernathy's suitcase had been, sits a single, black, leather-bound book. The book with no title. Her blood runs cold. It wasn't a dream. It was real. And a strange, terrifying salesman had just been in her house. A sudden, overwhelming urge to open the book, to see what secrets it holds, washes over her. It's a dangerous, self-destructive impulse, she knows, but it's also irresistible. With a trembling hand, she reaches for the book. Her fingers brush against the cold, smooth leather. A strange, tingling sensation, like a low-voltage electric current, shoots up her arm. She opens the book. The pages are blank, all of them, except for the very last page. On the last page, in a neat, elegant script, are 2 words: Rachel's story. A scream builds in her throat, but no sound comes out. The book falls from her nerveless fingers and lands on the floor with a soft, final thud. The television flickers and dies, plunging the room into darkness, and in the sudden, suffocating silence, she hears it. A soft, insistent knocking at the back door. The next few days passed in a blur of fear and paranoia. Rachel barely slept, and when she did, her dreams were filled with the image of Mr. Abernathy's too wide smile and the strange, unsettling objects in his suitcase. She jumped at every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside her window. The world, which at once felt so safe and familiar, now seemed to be filled with hidden threats and lurking dangers. She tried to convince herself that it had all been a hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But the black, leather-bound book was still there, a tangible, terrifying reminder of that night. It sat on her coffee table, a silent, malevolent presence in her living room. She hadn't touched it since that first night, but she could feel its pull, a dark, seductive whisper at the edge of her consciousness. She considered going to the police, but what would she tell them? That a strange salesman had come to her house in the middle of the night and tried to sell her memories? They would think she was crazy. They would lock her up. So she said nothing. She went about her daily routine, a hollow, robotic imitation of her former self. She went to work, she smiled at her colleagues, she made small talk with her neighbors. But it was all a performance, a carefully constructed facade to hide the terror that was slowly eating away at her from the inside. One evening, a week after Mr. Abernathy's visit, she came home from work to find her front door slightly ajar. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. She always locked her door, always. She pushed the door open, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was silent. But it was a heavy, watchful silence, the kind that precedes a storm. She called out, her voice a weak, trembling thing. "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. She crept into the house, her senses on high alert. Nothing seemed to be out of place. Nothing had been stolen. But the feeling of being watched, of a hostile presence in her home, was overwhelming. She made her way to the living room, and that's when she saw it. The black book was open on the coffee table, and on the first page, in the same neat, elegant script as before, a single sentence had been written. Rachel was a lonely woman. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she had to grab on to the back of the sofa to keep from falling. How was this possible? Who had been in her house? Who had written in the book? 1,000 frantic, terrified thoughts raced through her mind. Had Mr. Abernathy come back? Was he watching her? Was he playing some kind of sick, twisted game with her? She slammed the book shut, her hands trembling. She had to get out of there. She had to go somewhere safe. She ran to her bedroom and started throwing clothes into a bag. She would go to her sister's house. She would be safe there. But as she was about to leave, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A soft, melodic humming coming from the living room. It was a familiar tune, a lullaby her mother used to sing to her when she was a child. But it was distorted, twisted into something dark and menacing. She froze, her hand on the doorknob. The humming grew louder, closer. It was coming from the living room. With a courage she didn't know she possessed, she crept back to the living room. The humming was coming from the book. The book was vibrating on the coffee table, a low, rhythmic hum that seemed to resonate in her very bones. And as she watched, the pages began to turn, one by one, as if an invisible hand were leafing through them. The writing appeared on the pages as they turned, the story of her life, her deepest secrets, her darkest fears, all laid bare in that neat, elegant script. Rachel was a lonely woman, haunted by the ghosts of her past. She had never gotten over the death of her parents, a car accident that had snatched them away from her when she was just a teenager. She had built a wall around her heart, a fortress of solitude to keep the pain at bay. But the loneliness was a cancer, eating away at her soul, leaving her empty and hollow inside. Tears streamed down her face as she read the words, each one a dagger in her heart. It was all true, every last word of it. The book continued to write, detailing her failed relationships, her unfulfilled dreams, her aching loneliness. It was a cruel, merciless vivisection of her life, exposing all of her vulnerabilities, all of her pain. And then the writing changed. It became predictive. Rachel would run, the book wrote, the ink still wet on the page. She would run to her sister's house, seeking a safe haven from the storm that was about to break. But there is no safe haven. There is no escape. Mr. Abernathy always gets what he wants. A new wave of terror washed over her, colder and more profound than anything she had ever felt before. The book wasn't just telling her story. It was writing it. It was controlling it. She had to destroy it. She lunged for the book, but it snapped shut before she could grab it. The humming stopped, and the room was plunged back into a heavy, oppressive silence. She stood there for a long moment, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind reeling. The book was a trap, a cage, and she was the bird trapped inside. A sudden, defiant anger surged through her. She would not be a puppet. She would not let this thing, this monster, control her life. She grabbed the book and ran to the fireplace. She would burn it. She would watch it turn to ash and dust. But as she was about to throw it into the flames, a voice that was not her own, a voice that seemed to come from inside her own head, whispered a single, chilling word. Don't. It was Mr. Abernathy's voice, smooth and seductive, a silken thread of poison in her mind. You don't want to do that, Rachel, the voice whispered. That book is a part of you now. If you destroy it, you destroy yourself.
"Get out of my head!" she screamed, clutching her temples. "But I'm not in your head, Rachel," the voice purred. "I'm in your story, and I can make it a happy one. I can give you everything you've ever wanted. Love, success, happiness. All you have to do is ask." The temptation was a sweet, insidious poison seeping into the cracks of her resolve. A life without loneliness, a life without pain. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. "What's the price?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The voice chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate in her very soul. "Oh, it's a small price, Rachel, a trifle. Just a few memories, the ones you don't need anymore, the ones that are holding you back." She thought of her parents, the memory of the car accident, the mangled wreckage, the blood. The pain of it was a constant, dull ache in her heart. To be free of that? And in return, she asked, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The voice chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate in her very soul. Oh, it's a small price, Rachel, a trifle. Just a few memories, the ones you don't need anymore, the ones that are holding you back. She thought of her parents, the memory of the car accident, the mangled wreckage, the blood. The pain of it was a constant, dull ache in her heart. To be free of that? And in return, she asked, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. In return, the voice whispered, I will rewrite your story. I will give you a new one, a better one. You will be happy, Rachel. I promise. The book fell from her hands and landed on the floor with a soft thud. She sank to her knees, her body trembling, her mind a battlefield of hope and fear. She knew it was a deal with the devil, but it was a deal she was desperate to make. Okay, she whispered, the word a surrender, a prayer, a death sentence. I'll do it. The moment the word left her lips, a strange, cold sensation washed over her. It was as if a part of her, a vital, essential part, was being scooped out, leaving a hollow, empty space behind. The memory of her parents, the good and the bad, the love and the pain, faded like an old photograph, leaving only a vague, indistinct blur. And then it was gone. She felt nothing, no grief, no sadness, just a strange, hollow emptiness. The book on the floor began to glow, a faint, ethereal light emanating from its pages. It opened, and the writing began to appear, fast and furious, the story of her new life, her better life, being written in real time. Rachel was a successful artist, her paintings celebrated for their vibrant colors and emotional depth. She was married to a kind and handsome man who adored her, and they had 2 beautiful children who filled their lives with laughter and joy. She was happy, she was loved, she was complete. A smile, a genuine, unforced smile, spread across her face. It was all true. She could feel it. The loneliness, the pain, it was all gone, replaced by a warm, comforting glow of happiness. She had made the right choice. She was sure of it. But as she basked in the warmth of her new reality, a single nagging thought, a tiny splinter of doubt, lodged itself in the back of her mind. If she was so happy, why did she feel so empty? The new life was everything the book had promised. Rachel woke up every morning in a beautiful sun-drenched house, next to a man who looked at her with nothing but love and adoration in his eyes. Her children, a boy and a girl with their father's smile and her artistic talent, were a constant source of joy. Her paintings sold for exorbitant prices, and the art world hailed her as a visionary, a genius. She was happy. She had to be. The book said so. But the emptiness remained, a persistent, gnawing void in the center of her being. It was a constant low-level hum of wrongness, a feeling that she was an imposter in her own life. She would look at her husband, this kind, loving man, and feel nothing. She would play with her children, their laughter echoing in the big, empty house, and feel a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The memories of her old life, the one before Mr. Abernathy, were gone, erased, as completely as if they had never existed. But sometimes, in the dead of night, she would wake up with a single inexplicable word on her lips. Mom. The word would hang in the air, a ghost of a memory, a phantom limb of a life she could no longer remember. And the emptiness would intensify, a cold, suffocating wave of loss for something she couldn't name. She tried to ignore it, to push it down, to drown it in the manufactured happiness of her new life. She painted, she laughed, she loved, but it was all a performance, a hollow imitation of real emotion.
The black book now sat on her bedside table, a constant, silent reminder of the bargain she had made. She never opened it. She was afraid of what she might find. One day, her husband came home with a gift for her. It was a small, antique silver locket. "I saw it in a little shop downtown and thought of you," he said, his smile warm and genuine. He opened the locket, and inside there was a tiny, faded photograph of a young couple standing in a field of wildflowers. The young man had kind eyes and a shy smile. A jolt of something, a memory that was not her own but was achingly familiar, flashed through her mind. A sun-drenched afternoon, the smell of wildflowers, a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. Her husband looked at the photograph, a puzzled expression on his face. "I don't know," he said. "There was no one in it when I bought it. It was empty." But Rachel knew. She knew with the certainty that chilled her to the bone. It was the memory from the locket Mr. Abernathy had shown her, the memory of a first love. The pieces of the puzzle, the pieces she had been trying so hard to ignore, began to fall into place. Her new life, her happiness, it wasn't real. It was a collage, a patchwork of stolen memories, a hollow, second-hand existence. The anger, which had been a low, smoldering ember, now roared to life. She had been cheated. She had been lied to. She had traded her soul for a counterfeit happiness. That night, after her husband and children were asleep, she went to the bedside table and picked up the black book. Her hands were steady, her resolve firm. She opened the book. The story of her perfect life was still there, a cruel, mocking testament to her folly. But as she flipped through the pages, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. At the end of each chapter, in a small, almost invisible script, was a single line. A memory of a first love, purchased from a young woman in Ohio. A memory of a successful career, purchased from a failed artist in New York. A memory of a happy family, purchased from a lonely woman in California. Her perfect life was a lie, built on the stolen dreams of others. And the price she had paid, the memory of her parents, where had it gone? Who had it been sold to? A sudden, terrifying thought occurred to her. What if Mr. Abernathy didn't just sell memories? What if he traded them? She had to find him. She had to get her memories back. She had to reclaim her life, her real life, no matter how painful it was. But how? She had no idea where he was, or even what he was. And then she remembered the last page of the book, the page with her name on it. She flipped to the end of the book. The last page was no longer blank. On it, in the same neat, elegant script, was an address. And below the address, a single, chilling sentence. "Your next chapter awaits." The address led her to an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where nightmares are born. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling off the walls in long, leprous strips. A single bare light bulb flickered above the entrance, casting a sickly yellow glow on the crumbling facade. She knew she should be terrified. She knew she should turn around and run as far away as she could. But the anger, the righteous, burning anger, was stronger than the fear. She pushed open the heavy, creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. The warehouse was vast and empty, except for a single small wooden table in the center of the room. And sitting at the table, his back to her, was Mr. Abernathy. His head was bowed. He didn't turn around. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He just sat there, a dark, silent silhouette in the cavernous space. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice a low, smooth purr that echoed in the silence. "Give them back," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "Give me my memories back." Mr. Abernathy chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. He slowly turned around, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. It was a nightmare. His skin was pale and translucent, stretched taut over a skull that seemed too large for his body. His eyes were not human. They were black, bottomless pits swirling with a cold, ancient malice. And his smile, that too wide, predatory smile, was a gash in his face, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. He was not a man. He was something else, something old and terrible. "But why would you want them back?" he asked, his voice a silken mockery of human speech. "They're so painful, so messy. The life I gave you is so much better, so much cleaner." "It's not real," she said, her voice growing stronger, fueled by her anger. "It's a lie, a stolen, second-hand lie." Mr. Abernathy's smile widened. "Real is a matter of perspective, my dear Rachel. Your new life is real to you, is it not? You feel the happiness, you feel the love. What does it matter where it comes from?" "It matters to me," she said, her voice a low, determined growl. "I want my life back, my real life, the good and the bad, the joy and the pain. It's mine." Mr. Abernathy sighed, a long, theatrical sigh of disappointment. "Very well," he said, "if you insist, but a deal is a deal, and a price must be paid." He gestured to the table in front of him. On it sat two objects, her black leather-bound book and a small, intricately carved wooden box, the box that contained the memory of a perfect revenge. "Your story for another," he said, his black eyes glinting in the dim light. "A fair trade, don't you think?" He wanted her to take the memory of revenge. He wanted her to become like him, a dealer in pain and misery. "No," she said, her voice firm, "I won't do it." Mr. Abernathy's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold, reptilian fury. "You have no choice," he hissed, his voice losing its silken edge, becoming a harsh, guttural snarl. "The story is already written." He opened her book, and the pages began to turn, the writing appearing on the page, the ink black as pitch. Rachel, consumed by a thirst for revenge against the creature who had stolen her life, took the box, and in that moment, her soul, what was left of it, was his. The room grew cold, the shadows deepening, coalescing around him. He was a creature of darkness, of despair, and he was pulling her down into the abyss with him. She had to fight. She had to rewrite the ending. With a scream of defiance, she lunged for the table, not for the box, but for the book, her story. She grabbed it, her fingers closing around the cold, smooth leather. A jolt of energy, of power, surged through her. It was her life, her story, and she would be the one to write the ending. She tore the last page from the book, the page with the address, the page that had led her to this place. And as she did, the warehouse, the table, Mr. Abernathy, they all began to flicker, to fade, like a bad dream. "What are you doing?" he shrieked, his voice a high, thin wail of rage and disbelief. "You can't! The story is already written!" "I'm writing a new one," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength.
She closed her eyes and concentrated, pouring all of her will, all of her pain, all of her love into the tattered page in her hand. Rachel was a woman who had lost everything, she wrote, not with a pen, but with her mind, with her soul. But she was not broken. She was strong, and she would find her way back. She would find her way home. The warehouse dissolved into a whirlwind of light and shadow. Mr. Abernathy's final agonized scream was swallowed by the void. And then there was silence. Rachel opened her eyes. She was back in her living room, the old, familiar living room of her real life. The grandfather clock was ticking in the corner, a steady, comforting rhythm. The television was playing a late-night movie. Everything was as it had been before he came. But something was different. The emptiness was gone, and in its place, a faint, flickering warmth, a memory. A sun-drenched afternoon in a field of wildflowers, her mother's smile, her father's laughter. It was just a fragment, a whisper of a memory, but it was hers, and it was real. She looked down at her hand. She was still holding the tattered page from the book, and on it, in her own messy, imperfect handwriting, were the words she had written. She would find her way home. The book was gone. Mr. Abernathy was gone. But the story was not over. It was just beginning. She had a long road ahead of her, a road of rediscovery, of piecing together the shattered fragments of her past. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. She was the author of her own story, and she would write a damn good one. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day, a new beginning. Rachel stood at the window, watching the world come to life. The long, dark night was over, and she had survived. She was no longer a character in someone else's story. She was the writer, the hero, and her greatest adventure was just about to begin. The road to reclaiming her memories, her life, her very self would be arduous, she knew. But as she stood there, bathed in the gentle morning light, a quiet strength bloomed within her. The hollowness that had been her constant companion for so long was now filled with a quiet determination. She made coffee, the familiar ritual, a comforting anchor in the sea of uncertainty that was her life. The aroma, rich and earthy, filled the small kitchen, a stark contrast to the cloying, artificial sweetness of the stolen memories. This was real. This was hers. Her first step was to try and remember. She sat at her kitchen table, a blank notebook and a pen in front of her, and she closed her eyes. She reached into the depths of her mind, past the gaping holes and the faded echoes, searching for something, anything, to hold on to. It was like trying to catch smoke with her bare hands. Fragments would come to her, fleeting and disconnected, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the sound of a particular song on the radio, the taste of her grandmother's apple pie. Each one was a tiny, precious jewel, a piece of the mosaic of her life. She wrote them all down, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed. She drew pictures, she hummed melodies, she did anything she could to coax the sleeping memories from their slumber. It was a slow, frustrating process. There were days when the blankness of her mind was a suffocating weight, when the despair threatened to consume her. But then a new memory would surface, a tiny spark of light in the darkness, and it would be enough to keep her going. She started visiting places from her past, or what she thought was her past. The old playground where she used to play as a child, the library where she had spent countless hours lost in the pages of books, the small family-owned restaurant where she had celebrated her high school graduation. Some places were a dead end, a blank slate that triggered nothing. But others were like a key, unlocking a hidden door in her mind. A flood of sensations, of emotions, of memories would wash over her, so intense, so vivid, it was like she was reliving them. She remembered the skinned knee she got from falling off the swings at the playground, the taste of salty tears mixed with the metallic tang of blood. She remembered the thrill of discovering a new author at the library, the smell of old paper and ink a comforting perfume. She remembered the pride on her parents' faces as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the warmth of their hugs, the sound of their cheers. With each new memory, she felt herself becoming more whole, more real. The emptiness was receding, replaced by the rich, complex tapestry of her own life, with all its joys and sorrows, its triumphs and failures. One day, while cleaning out her attic, she found a box of old photographs. As she dusted off the lid and opened it, a wave of emotion, so powerful it almost knocked her off her feet, washed over her. There they were, her parents, smiling at her from a faded photograph. Her mother, with her kind eyes and gentle smile. Her father, with his strong arms and mischievous grin. The memory of the car accident came back to her, not as a cold clinical fact, but as a raw, visceral experience. The screech of tires, the shattering of glass, the sudden, terrifying silence. The pain of it was a physical blow, a gaping wound in her heart. But this time it was different. This time the pain was mixed with love. A deep, abiding love that transcends death, that transcends time. She wept. She wept for the parents she had lost, for the years that had been stolen from her. But then, tears of release, of catharsis. The grief was a part of her, a part of her story, and she would no longer run from it. As she looked through the photographs, she found one of herself, as a teenager, standing in a field of wildflowers, a shy, happy smile on her face. And next to her, a young man with kind eyes and a familiar smile. Her first love. His name was Daniel. They had met in high school, and for a brief, glorious summer, they had been inseparable. He was the one who encouraged her to pursue her art, who had believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. The memory of him, of their time together, came flooding back to her. The long walks in the park, the late-night conversations, the first, tentative kiss. It was a sweet, poignant memory, tinged with the sadness of a love that was not meant to last. She wondered what had happened to him, where he was now. And as if in answer to her question, she found a letter tucked away at the bottom of the box. It was from Daniel, written a few years after he had moved away. He had become a doctor, just as he had always dreamed of. He was married with 2 children, and he had never forgotten her. "I still have the painting you gave me," he wrote, "the one of the field of wildflowers. It hangs in my office, a reminder of a time when everything seemed possible." A soft smile touched her lips. He was happy, and that was all that mattered. Her life was not a grand epic novel, full of dramatic twists and turns. It was a quiet, simple story, full of small, ordinary moments of joy and sorrow, of love and loss. And it was beautiful. It was hers. She went back to her painting, but this time she didn't paint the vibrant, soulless canvases of her stolen life. She painted her memories, the field of wildflowers, her parents' smiling faces, the taste of her grandmother's apple pie. Her art was no longer about fame or fortune. It was about truth. It was about connection. It was about healing. One day, she was in a small local art gallery looking at the work of other artists when she saw it, a painting that made her heart stop. It was a dark, surreal, and deeply disturbing piece, but it was also undeniably brilliant. And the artist's name? It was familiar. She asked the gallery owner about him. He was a reclusive, enigmatic figure, the owner told her. He had appeared out of nowhere a few years ago, his work already mature, fully formed. No one knew where he came from or what his story was. But Rachel knew. She found his address, a small, run-down apartment in a bad part of town. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The man who answered the door was a ghost, a hollowed-out shell of a man, his eyes empty, his face etched with a deep, profound sadness. He was the failed artist from New York, the one whose memories of a successful career she had been living. She didn't know what to say to him. How could she explain the inexplicable? How could she apologize for a crime she had unwittingly committed? But she didn't have to. He looked at her, and a flicker of recognition, of understanding sparked in his dead eyes. "You," he whispered, his voice a dry, rasping sound. "You're one of them, too." They talked for hours. He told her his story, a story of a desperate man who had traded his soul for a dream, only to find that the dream was a nightmare. He had been given the memory of a successful career, but it was a hollow, joyless thing, a constant reminder of his own failure. And in return, he had been given something else, a memory of a perfect revenge, a dark, poisonous memory that had twisted him, corrupted him, turned him into the bitter, broken man he was today. Rachel told her story, her journey of rediscovery, of healing. She told him that it was possible to find your way back. It was the beginning of a strange, unlikely friendship. They were two broken souls, two survivors of the same shipwreck, and they found solace in each other's company. Together, they started a support group for others like them, people who had been tricked, cheated, and broken by Mr. Abernathy. There were more of them than she could have imagined, each one with a story of loss, of despair, of a desperate bargain made in the dead of night. They were a strange, eclectic group. A young woman from Ohio who had sold her memory of a first love for a chance at a happy family. A lonely woman from California who had given up her memory of a happy family for a successful career. They were all pieces of a puzzle that Mr. Abernathy had created, a puzzle that they were now putting back together. They shared their stories, their memories, their pain. They helped each other heal, to reclaim the lives that had been stolen from them. It was a long, slow process, but they were not alone. And in that, there was strength. In that, there was hope.
Rachel never saw Mr. Abernathy again, but sometimes, in the dead of night, she would feel a flicker of his presence, a cold, dark whisper at the edge of her consciousness. He was still out there, she knew, preying on the lonely, the desperate, the broken. But she was no longer afraid of him. He was a creature of darkness, of despair, and she was a creature of light, of hope. Her life was her own, her story was her own, and she would not let him have the final word. She continued to paint, her work now celebrated not for its technical brilliance, but for its raw, emotional honesty. Her paintings were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of memory, to the enduring strength of love. She never found all the missing pieces of her life. There were still gaps, still holes in the tapestry of her past, but she had learned to live with them. She had learned that a life does not have to be perfect to be beautiful. One day, years later, she was walking in the park when she saw a young couple sitting on a bench, their heads close together, their laughter echoing in the clear, crisp air. They were so young, so in love, so full of hope. And in that moment, she understood. Mr. Abernathy sold memories, but he could not create them. He could only steal them, twist them, corrupt them. But memories are not just things to be bought and sold. They are the building blocks of our lives, the threads that connect us to each other, to our past, to ourselves. They are precious and they are powerful. And they are ours. Rachel smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. The emptiness was long gone, replaced by a deep, quiet sense of peace. She had her story back, and it was a good one, a real one. A story of a woman who had been to hell and back and had come out stronger on the other side. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A new night was beginning, but this time she was not afraid of the darkness. for she knew that even in the darkest of nights, there is always the promise of a new day and a new story waiting to be written.